In a quiet Chicago grocery store, Dr. Marcus Ellison was publicly accused of theft, an act that shattered his dignity and sparked outrage. The accusation came from Sarah Collins, a clerk whose fear and unexamined bias clouded her judgment. But that night, Marcus transformed humiliation into a powerful stand, delivering a speech that turned his pain into hope and earned him the nation's highest honor. Just wait until you see how this story unfolds, and why justice, in the end, truly prevailed. It was a quiet Thursday evening in Oakwood, a peaceful suburban neighborhood of Chicago. The air smelled faintly of rain and coffee, and the low hum of shoppers moving between aisles filled the softly lit grocery store. For most people, this was just another ordinary night. For Dr. Marcus Ellison, it was supposed to be a simple stop after a long day at the university. Marcus was weary. He had spent hours delivering lectures on renewable energy, his voice hoarse, but his mind still buzzing with equations, experiments, and future plans. His lab coat, once crisp and white, now carried soft wrinkles from the day's work. Over one shoulder hung his laptop bag, a faithful companion filled with papers, prototypes, and ideas he hoped would change the world. He moved quietly down the aisles, scanning shelves without urgency. His steps brought him to the electronics section, where a new issue of Scientific Horizons rested among glossy magazines. Marcus bent slightly, examining the cover. He adjusted his glasses and reached to pull the journal toward him, not noticing the small cluster of customers nearby. Then it happened. From across the store came a sharp, piercing voice. "Thief!" The words sliced through the calm evening like a blade. Marcus froze mid-step, the journal still in his hand. It wasn't just a word. It was an accusation broadcast loud enough for everyone to hear. Shoppers stopped. Carts squeaked to a halt. Phones appeared almost instantly in hands, cameras flashing, heads turned, conversations paused. Sarah Collins, the store clerk, stood near the entrance of the electronics aisle, her face taut, her voice trembling with conviction. She pointed directly at Marcus, as if her finger alone could prove guilt. "That man," she repeated sharply. "He's stealing." A cold wave of disbelief settled over Marcus. His breath caught in his throat. He looked toward her, searching for reason, for a sign that this was some mistake. But Sarah's expression was resolute, her eyes fixed firmly on him, reflecting fear and certainty in equal measure. Around him, shoppers whispered. Some stared in confusion, others in suspicion. Marcus tried to speak. His voice was calm but steady. "I already paid for this," he said, reaching into his coat for the receipt. "I checked out just a moment ago. You must be mistaken." Sarah shook her head without looking at him. "Security! We have a thief." Her words rang sharp in the air. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation declared as fact. The store manager appeared, hurried by the commotion, his expression uncertain. Security staff began to move toward Marcus. He held up his hands, his voice steady but tinged with disbelief. "Please, check your records. You'll see I paid." But his words fell into the growing noise. Whispers turned to murmurs of doubt. The sound of clicking phone cameras grew louder. Marcus's mind raced. He could not understand why. Out of all the customers in the store, Sarah had singled him out. There had been no evidence, no reason beyond her certainty. And then Marcus felt something deeper than confusion: humiliation. The humiliation of being accused without cause in front of strangers. The humiliation of seeing years of dedication to science and education reduced to suspicion. Anger surged, sharp and unrelenting. But it was not just anger at Sarah. It was anger at what her action represented. In that instant, Marcus realized she was not reacting to facts, but to a lifetime of unexamined assumptions, to prejudice disguised as instinct. It was a reminder that even in a modern America, in 2025, injustice could still live in the smallest acts, in a voice raised too quickly, in a finger pointed without proof. Marcus stood still, surrounded by the noise and eyes of the store. The anger inside him burned hotter than ever. This was not simply about a grocery store misunderstanding. This was about dignity, about truth, about the fact that injustice could still happen in the quietest places and at the most ordinary moments. And so, without knowing what would come next, Marcus braced himself. The tension in the store had barely begun when the situation spiraled. The manager, a man in his 50s named Tom Reynolds, stepped toward Marcus and Sarah with a hesitant expression. His footsteps echoed softly against the linoleum floor. He glanced between the two, unsure how to untangle the sudden chaos. "I'm going to call security," Tom said quietly. It was not a challenge, but a choice born of uncertainty. Sarah nodded sharply. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but before he could finish, two security officers approached. Their expressions were polite but firm, a rehearsed neutrality that carried little warmth. Marcus felt his voice tightening. "Please, there's been a mistake," he said again. "I have the receipt. I paid for everything." His tone was steady but carried a note of disbelief. The crowd was growing, drawn in by the sudden drama. Phones were out now, recording. Some people whispered quietly to themselves. Others stared with a mix of confusion and judgment. Security asked Marcus to step aside. He obeyed, slowly, his mind working through the humiliation as if it were a heavy weight pressing on his chest. Sarah stood nearby, watching, her face pale, eyes fixed. Tom lingered uncertainly. Marcus felt the weight of silence around him, a silence filled with judgment, suspicion, and unseen assumptions. Minutes later, the officers gently but firmly escorted him to a small back room in the store. They asked questions, checked his bag, examined his coat as Marcus waited quietly. He was aware of every glance, every footstep outside the door. Somewhere in that time, Marcus's thoughts began to spiral beyond the moment, to the greater significance of what was happening. The receipt. He knew he had it, but even if he proved himself innocent, the damage would not simply vanish. The moment had already been recorded in memory, captured in phone cameras. It had been shared, retold, reshaped. When the truth emerged, hours later, after the store reviewed security footage and payment records, it became undeniable. Marcus had paid. Sarah's accusation was without merit. But by then, the wound was already there. The video surfaced online before Marcus could even leave the store. Within hours, it spread across platforms. Millions watched. The story took on a life of its own. Social media was alight with outrage. Hashtags calling for justice trended. News outlets picked it up. Marcus found himself swept into something far beyond the grocery store, the center of a national conversation about race, bias, dignity, and respect. For Marcus, that conversation was painful. On-camera interviews, panel discussions, and articles began asking him questions he was not ready to answer. They wanted his thoughts on the incident, on racism, on prejudice. Marcus spoke with calm precision, but beneath his words lay a rawness he could not hide. He told them about years of dedication to science, about decades of work aimed at making the world cleaner and safer, and how all of it, in an instant, had been overshadowed by a single accusation, a word shouted across an aisle. The pain went deeper than humiliation. Marcus felt something sharper, the sense that what had happened was not an anomaly, but part of a deeper truth. That dignity, no matter how earned, could still be stripped away in a moment. That justice, however certain it seemed, could falter. His friends noticed the change quickly. Marcus stopped taking evening walks. His laughter, once easy and warm, grew quieter. He began declining speaking invitations he would have once welcomed. His office at the university felt heavier, his lecture notes untouched. Even in the company of colleagues who supported him, Marcus withdrew. But there was a deeper wound than those physical signs of retreat. What hurt most was not the humiliation in front of strangers. It was the reminder that bias, invisible, unexamined, and persistent, could twist truth. That even in the age of instant information, even with evidence clear as day, injustice could still prevail in the moment it was claimed. That night, Marcus lay awake long after his mind had stopped racing. He thought of Sarah Collins, of the store manager, of the strangers who watched without intervening. And he thought of the long road ahead, not just for himself, but for every voice that had been silenced before it was heard. Pain was not just a feeling, it was a call, and Marcus knew he could not ignore it. The days after the incident became a storm. What began as an afternoon confrontation in a quiet grocery store grew into a movement of voices. Across social media, Marcus's story was shared again and again, not as a minor misunderstanding, but as a symbol of something far deeper. Civil rights organizations, scientists, students, and everyday citizens began speaking out. They posted articles, shared the footage, and called for accountability. What had happened to Marcus was no longer just his pain. It was part of a larger conversation about fairness, bias, and respect. At the university, the response was swift. President Karen Wallace issued a formal statement condemning the incident. Faculty members spoke out. Students organized vigils and discussions. Signs appeared on campus. Justice for Marcus Ellison, and Science should stand for truth. The support was overwhelming, yet it brought Marcus mixed emotions. Gratitude shadowed by the bitter memory of what had happened. Sarah Collins was suspended pending an independent investigation. The store issued an apology, though for Marcus it felt incomplete. The moment could not be erased. But in the midst of the turmoil, something unexpected began to grow inside him. Hope. Hope was not immediate. It came quietly, almost imperceptibly. It came when Marcus read messages of encouragement from students he had never met. It came when his colleagues spoke with unwavering support. And it came when invitations arrived for him to speak at events, to share not just his work as a scientist, but his experience as a human being facing injustice. The turning point came that night. Marcus received an invitation that seemed surreal, to speak at the National Science Awards ceremony. It was an honor already, but after everything, it felt almost symbolic, a chance to turn the story of humiliation into a moment of purpose. Standing backstage at the grand auditorium, Marcus felt the weight of the night pressing on him. The lights beyond the curtain were bright enough to erase the shadows. Hundreds of people waited in their seats. Scientists, students, leaders, journalists. The air buzzed with anticipation. When Marcus stepped into the light, there was silence. For a moment, he felt the world shrink to that single moment. He adjusted the microphone and began, not with science, but with his story. "I stand here tonight," he said softly, "not only as a scientist, but as someone who has faced injustice. His voice carried steadily across the hall. He told them of that moment in the grocery store, of the humiliation, the anger, and the pain. But he did not dwell in despair. His words turned toward hope. Hope that truth will prevail. Hope that dialogue can overcome prejudice. Hope that the work we do, in science, in life, can make a difference. The audience listened in silence. Marcus spoke of his research, of renewable energy as a path toward a sustainable future, and of the greater fight for dignity and fairness. He made no grand declarations of victory yet, only the quiet strength of conviction. When it came time for the judges to announce the award, Marcus stood to the side, heart pounding. "And the National Science Prize goes to Dr. Marcus Ellison." A wave of applause swept the room. People rose to their feet. Cameras flashed. Marcus felt his chest tighten. Tears formed in his eyes, not only from the honor, but from the journey that had led here. Stepping forward to receive the award, Marcus held the gleaming trophy in his hands. He looked out at the audience, breathing deeply. This recognition was not just for his work in renewable energy. It was for dignity. It was for fairness. It was for the fight against injustice. For the first time since that day in the grocery store, Marcus felt a profound sense of release. The pain had not vanished, but hope had taken root. And with that hope came a promise to use his voice, his work, and his story to inspire change. The applause still echoed in the grand hall when Marcus Ellison stepped away from the stage. The weight of the moment, the recognition, the honor, the meaning, settled over him like a quiet truth. Around him, the noise of conversation swelled again, but Marcus moved with purpose, carrying not just an award, but a story. From across the backstage corridor, Sarah Collins stood in silence, her face pale under the soft glow of the lights. She had watched the entire ceremony, her expression unreadable, as Marcus spoke with strength and calmness that seemed to echo far beyond the walls of the auditorium. Something had shifted in her that evening. Later, away from the cameras and applause, Sarah approached him. Her voice was low, almost fragile. "Dr. Ellison," she began, hesitating, "I see now how wrong I was." She looked down for a moment, then back at him. "It wasn't just a mistake. It was fear. It was assumptions I never questioned. It was bias I didn't even know was there." Marcus, exhausted but steady, regarded her quietly. The years of hurt and the long path to this moment weighed in his silence. Then he spoke, softly but firmly. "Awareness is the first step, but action is what changes the world." His words carried no accusation, only an invitation to recognize the truth and to choose to change. Sarah nodded. There was no defense left, only acknowledgement. And for her, that acknowledgement carried its own burden and its own beginning. That night, the story did not end quietly. Headlines lit up across media platforms. They did not speak only of Marcus Ellison receiving the National Science Prize. They spoke of courage in the face of injustice. They spoke of dignity reclaimed, of truth spoken aloud under the brightest lights. They told of a moment where prejudice was confronted openly, where someone dared to stand and say, "This is wrong, and we must change." In universities, coffee shops, and online forums, Marcus's speech became a touchstone. Students quoted him. Scientists debated the significance of his words. Activists shared the moment as proof that injustice could be challenged and that truth could prevail. It was more than a story of personal vindication. It had become a catalyst for conversation and reflection. The next morning, Marcus returned to his lab. The campus was quiet, but the weight of what had happened still lingered. Colleagues greeted him with smiles of respect. Students stopped him in corridors, offering words of thanks and admiration. But Marcus carried something deeper than applause. He carried responsibility. His work in renewable energy, the years of research, the late nights, the failures and breakthroughs, now seemed to have a new dimension. It was not just science. It was a part of a larger struggle to prove that truth matters, that every voice matters, and that dignity cannot be taken without resistance. The speech Marcus gave that night at the awards ceremony spread across the world. Shared millions of times, it became more than words. It became a movement. People posted excerpts, tagged friends, started conversations. Marcus's voice became a symbol, not of anger alone, but of the belief that change is possible. The story did not end with vengeance. It ended with change. Sarah Collins would later speak publicly about her own reflection, acknowledging her mistake and speaking about the importance of confronting bias. The store began new training programs for employees, emphasizing empathy and awareness. The university hosted forums on bias and fairness. For Marcus, the victory was not simply personal. It was a victory for something greater, for hope, for the belief that even in the face of deep injustice, the human spirit can rise. That truth, when spoken with courage, can spark transformation. In that way, Marcus Ellison's triumph was not just about an award. It was proof that dignity could be restored, that injustice could be challenged, that one person's voice, even when shouted down at first, could inspire the world. And in that light, Marcus knew his story was far from over. It was a story meant to be shared,